the negotiations at COP29 are due to end, parties struggle to find a middle point. Discussions on final draft divided the rich and developing countries. However, the diplomats are hopeful on reaching the conclusion, even if it takes a couple more days. COP29 has entered its critical phase in Baku, with hopes rising for what is being called the Baku breakthrough. The newly released draft text on the new collective quantified goal, or NCQG, marks progress towards consensus between developed and developing nations. However, discussions indicate that the text will require further consultations.
We need to see real rather than cosmetic solutions. Nevertheless, we remain hopeful that in these final days we can come to an outcome that delivers confidence that markets can contribute to our collective efforts.
The draft acknowledges that the window of opportunity is rapidly narrowing. European nations have been particularly vocal about the urgency to act now, warning that delays could stall progress for years. Both wealthy and poorer countries have criticized the document for failing to set a clear funding target for developing nations.
This is unacceptable. But to our disappointment so far, our development partners have not responded to our request of a figure, because without a figure, the rest really is important, but we need a figure as a headline to really determine whether we are making progress, and people outside this room are expecting us to come up with that.
Importantly, the text clarifies that climate finance will be provided and mobilized from developed to all developing countries. It also emphasizes the need for climate finance to be both affordable and predictable.
We have spent a lot of time on the outcomes of the presidency, and we need to leave here successfully. In the short time remaining, we must maintain this spirit and complete the decision package. If Decision 1 reduction must come from Baku, we have decisions prepared to shape our next nationally determined contribution. Our focus here should be on implementing these decisions, ensuring progress in the mitigation work program, and remaining within the authority provided for the submitted NDC. We are pleased with the progress made so far.
The world watches as negotiators race against time to finalize the NCQG. But there is a little doubt the summit may extend beyond its scheduled conclusion.
A Chinese firm has won the first renewable energy auction held in Baku. The driving force was the Azerbaijani Ministry of Energy in collaboration with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, with the goal of constructing a 100-megawatt solar power plant. Altogether, 100 companies demonstrated interest in the auction. The Chinese company Universal International Holdings Limited won the auction by placing the lowest bid for each kilowatt-hour of electricity generated. According to the ministry, the project will save 57 million cubic meters of natural gas annually and cut carbon dioxide emissions by 124,000 tons. Javid Abdullayev, director of the Azerbaijani Renewable Energy Agency, highlighted significant advances in the country's renewable sector.
The agreements signed in the field of renewable energy differ from those in the hydrocarbon sector. Those agreements are based solely on Azerbaijani legislation and established formalization procedures, and this has continued with today's auction. Azerbaijan also successfully presented its National Strategic Review for Hydrocarbon document, which sparked extensive discussions. We have also introduced today's auction and signed agreements with representatives from many countries regarding energy storage systems. And ongoing implementation work is underway.
The renewable energy sector has been in the spotlight for global attention during the past few years, and Azerbaijan is leading the way in the South Caucasus and has just hosted COP29.
Well done, thank you.
The European Union will keep pushing climate actions forward. Even if the US backtracks from the climate investments, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has announced during news conference at COP29. During Donald Trump's previous presidency, his administration's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement has been raising concerns among nations about whether a second term would bring similar actions undermining climate initiatives.
If the United States retreats on climate policy, our response to America First will be a clear Europe United. Europe United for more climate protection through the Green New Deal and to boost climate investment across our continent.
The minister also calls for shared responsibility in addressing climate change, emphasizing that while industrialized nations must own their historical emissions, wealthy fossil fuel-rich countries must also contribute fairly in the name of justice.
On Gender Equality Day, a high-level event entitled Gender in Transparency was held at COP29 to emphasise the importance of integrating gender considerations into climate action and transparency frameworks. Organised in collaboration with UN Women, the event highlighted the need for gender-responsive data to ensure effective climate action and accountability. Key objectives included fostering high-level commitments to gender inclusion in climate reporting. The event also aimed to reinforce the gender-responsive climate action commitments made at COP28 and encourage governments to incorporate gender considerations into their nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. Judge Dr. Jemima Njuki stressed that climate change disproportionately affects women and girls, pushing millions into poverty and worsening food security under extreme climate scenarios.
Our own projections tell us that under a worst-case climate scenario, by 2050, climate change could push more than 158 million more women and girls into poverty and exacerbate food insecurity for 236 million more women and girls.
Recognizing these global challenges, countries like Azerbaijan are taking action. Bahar Maradova, chairperson of the Azerbaijani State Committee for Family, Women and Children's Affairs, highlighted the country's efforts to incorporate gender-sensitive climate adaptation into its national action plan for gender equality.
In line with our international and national commitments, the draft National Action Plan for Gender Equality has been developed. One of the main priorities of the plan is adaptation measures considering the impact of climate change on gender equality and the risks to women and children.
In response to these challenges, countries are developing concrete plans to address the intersection of gender and climate change.
The meaningful engagement of children and youth in climate processes at both national and international levels, including the NDC 3.0 process already underway in some countries, is of great importance and value for nations. The NDC review process provides countries with a crucial opportunity to emphasize their inclusive and ambitious actions in their national plans. This was discussed during the session titled Meaningful Engagement of Children and Youth in the NDC 3.0 process and Inventory of Progress and Achievements at COP29. It was noted that under the current NDCs, the world is on a path toward 2.7 Celsius warming.
What I expect that out of COP29, there is enough resources accumulated for youth, children, girls especially, including disabled and elderly as well. But the key focus is that these are the people who are the largest victim of climate change. They have to stand, they have to get out of the problem, they have to make their life resilient, and for that it is very important that they have financial support so that they can build their life which is more resilient and can able to face the problem of climate change.
COP29 will transform to the humanity platform, and will be, of course, will be very positive, very effective platform for the problems related climate change and also with peace too.
During the panel sessions, it was emphasized that there are various pathways for countries to achieve their emission reduction targets through NDCs. NDC reflects what countries are actually planning to do. For many nations, these represent binding commitments. However, for youth, these documents provide insight into what the future holds. Addressing intergenerational challenges also requires intergenerational leadership.
From the deserts of Sonora to the Arctic tundra, indigenous peoples are at the front lines of climate change.
We are very strongly impacted. We already live in a hot, dry climate, but we've seen drought, we've seen increasing heat. We're now reaching levels that it's almost hard to grow food in the summer, and also the rainfall doesn't come at the same time. That impacts many species, plant and animal species that are part of our indigenous traditional food systems.
These challenges felt by indigenous communities across the globe, rising seas, extreme weather, and the loss of ancestral lands threaten their culture and way of life.
We've been feeling the impacts of climate change for decades, and so a lot of our traditions and culture are interwoven with our environment, and so the impacts of climate change might not be felt culturally for other maybe urban cultures, but for us, climate change is literally the death to our language, our culture, our people.
In the Arctic, climate shifts are particularly dramatic. The only indigenous people in Europe, the Sami in Finland, feel particularly threatened.
The snow is melting there, ice are melting there. It's much more 1.5 to 3 Celsius degrees warmer than it has been before. So, for example, now there will be minus 30 degrees, but now it's plus, and we don't know how we don't have snow. So it's very big issue for the reindeer herders in my area, because I'm also a reindeer herder.
At COP29, indigenous leaders are calling for full recognition of their rights in climate negotiations. With COP30 set to take place in the Brazilian Amazon, the urgency has never been greater.
The main issue for indigenous people defended by the Brazilian government is the direct access to finance. Indigenous peoples cannot be the ones that are most impacted and not receiving finance to continue their lives. So for COP29, the expectation is that they can advance and ensure direct access to the finance for indigenous people, so that by COP30, we can start talking about implementation.
As COP29 wraps up, indigenous peoples who preserve 80% of the world's biodiversity and 36% of intact forest landscapes call for recognition and action.
Africa faces significant challenges today, stemming from the historical impacts of colonialism and neocolonialism. That's according to some African delegates at the COP29 Climate Change Conference. They say the continent's ability to fully develop its human and natural resources are hindered because of poor resource management and a lack of sustainable development.
The greatest challenge facing Africa today is appropriate deployment of available resources. That is one. The next is recovery from the effect of colonialism and neocolonialism. And between these two, Africa has been held back from developing appropriately. Africa has been held back from developing its human power, developing human capital, developing the environment, utilizing resources well, having peace, democracy, real government of the people. So I think these are the essential issues. So how do we get enough resources is one thing, but how do we, within the context of the influence of colonialism around, deploy these resources to do the best for our people?
Meanwhile, Nigeria's farming and fishing industries are also suffering from climate change.
The biggest challenge is actually the degradation of the land. Like, for example, I'm from Nigeria. In the Niger Delta, farmers can't actually farm on the land again. Fishermen can also fish on their land. Where I come from in the northern Nigeria, mining also has destroyed the land. And now, basically, what the people do is to farm, earn their living from farming, eat also, and also sell the rest. But because of the activities started from the colonial era, where international companies mine resources from the ground, this ground are actually left the bare and cannot be used for anything again.
The delegates from Africa said the continent's potential is hindered by colonial legacies, resource mismanagement, and climate change, making it crucial to address both past and present challenges for progress.
AfriHealth, AnewZ, and GCS.
Kazakhstan is increasing trade relations with Europe. President Tokayev is visiting Hungary, and the Trans-Caspian International Transport Corridor is on the agenda because of the transport and energy link between Asia and Europe. As Fariza Kalimurdzina tells us from Almaty, Kazakhstan.
Hungary continues to be a reliable strategic partner of Kazakhstan in the European Union. The last time President of Kazakhstan visited Budapest was almost 20 years ago, making this trip by Kassym-Jomart Tokayev a highly significant step in solidifying the strategic ties between the two countries. During his visit, President Tokayev held talks with Hungary's leadership discussing key areas of mutual cooperation, including trade, economic partnerships, energy, oil and gas, transport and education. A major topic of the discussions was the development of one of the most crucial strategic trade routes, the Trans-Caspian International Transport Corridor. This vital transport route connects Asia and Europe, and both countries are committed to expanding its potential. As a result of these talks, an agreement was signed between Kazakhstan's national railway carrier and the Xi'an Free Trade Port. This deal aims to strengthen trade and transport ties and unlock new opportunities for infrastructure development, logistics, and international trade. As President Tokayev noted during the visit, 85% of overland transit traffic between Asia and Europe passes through Kazakhstan. In the near future, it's expected that the volume of cargo deliveries along this road will reach 10 million tons. In addition to transport and infrastructure, trade relations between Kazakhstan and Hungary are also growing steadily. Last year, mutual trade between the two countries increased by 9%, and the goal is to bring the trade turnover to $1 billion in the near future. Kazakhstan is ready to supply 95 types of goods to Hungary with a total value of $700 million. These goods include energy products, petrochemicals, mechanical engineering, agriculture, and construction materials. Hungarian companies are also showing growing interest in investment opportunities in Kazakhstan, especially in sectors such as energy, infrastructure, and manufacturing. This visit marks a new chapter in the growing partnership between Kazakhstan and Hungary, with increasing opportunities for economic cooperation and regional development. As both countries look to strengthen their ties, we can expect even more progress in the coming years. Fariza Kalimurdzina, Almaty, AnewZ.
In what some view as an escalation of the fighting in Eastern Europe, Ukraine accused Russia of using an intercontinental ballistic missile. Russia refused to comment. Dasha Chernishova reports on the details surrounding the latest developments from Moscow.
Russia is doubling down on its accusations that the West is stoking a major escalation over the conflict in Ukraine. On Thursday, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that the outgoing Biden administration is deliberately provoking an escalation with Russia. His comments come after the Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed Ukraine fired 6 ATACMS missiles against Russia's Bryansk region and said 2 Storm Shadows were intercepted. The news follows a U.S. decision to allow Ukraine to use Western-supplied long-range weapons against targets deep inside Russia. Several Russian lawmakers called this step an escalation that could lead to World War III and the end of Ukrainian statehood. Earlier this week, Russian President Vladimir Putin changed the country's nuclear doctrine, lowering the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. The new framework would mean that an attack against Russia by a non-nuclear country supported by a nuclear one would be regarded as a joint attack. President Putin has also said that long-range strikes against Russia with Western arms would mean NATO's involvement in the conflict, adding that Moscow is preparing various responses to such a step. The Kremlin said Russia's foes should understand the inevitability of Moscow's response to any attack against Russia. On Thursday, Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said that a U.S. ballistic missile defense base in northern Poland is another, quote, frankly provocative step and a series of deeply destabilizing actions by the Americans and their allies. She said that will lead to an increase in the overall level of nuclear danger and that the base was on a Russian target list for potential destruction if necessary. The Kremlin, however, insists that it is placing maximum effort to avoid a nuclear conflict and that it hopes Western countries would do the same. Moscow, however, did not comment on the alleged ICBM strike against Ukrainian Dnipro, with Peskov saying he had nothing to say on that topic. Moscow also insists that it remains open for the talks if its demands are met. Dasha Chernysova in Moscow for AnewZ.
On the matter of further deepening of escalation of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, followed by Kyiv's usage of Western-supplied long-range missiles and Kremlin's updated nuclear doctrine, we spoke to German journalist and publicist Thomas Fassbender.
First of all, it's not inevitable, as the new nuclear doctrine doesn't oblige Russia to use nuclear weapons in case of an attack by a non-nuclear power with the help and support of a nuclear power, as it is phrased in the new nuclear doctrine. So Russia is and will be free in her reactions to any escalation or any attack by a non-nuclear country, according to that doctrine. But of course, you are right that the wording of the doctrine and the spirit of the doctrine increases the probability, the likelihood of an eventual, I'm not talking about today or tomorrow, but of an eventual in the nearer or farther future use of nuclear weapons by either side, in this case by the Russian side. So in spite of ATACMS and today and Storm Shadows and Scalp missiles, and in spite of even the use of an intercontinental ballistic missile today by Russia, I do not belong to that quarter that sees the Third World War and a nuclear war immediately ahead. This is a game of nerves. This is a game of politics. This is a game which is pretty much in collusion by the two American presidents, the incumbent and the sitting and the future one, Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump. And it is a game of nerves that I expect the Russians are not so very well prepared for it. So there remains an element of risk here. But now, as we can see for the last few days, let's say the Americans are playing hardball. Neither side really wants to destroy or incapacitate or somehow go too far as with respect to the damages to the other side, as both sides have in view forthcoming negotiations, sitting together at the negotiation table at some time after the 20th of January in 2025. And even Mr. Zelensky yesterday has acknowledged that his country will have to reckon with a, as he phrases it, temporary loss of some territory to Russian control, which of course he is committed and optimistic to regain at any further point of time, which we may leave open at this moment. But in any case, Mr. Putin has signaled his willingness to negotiate. But it's going to be, and I think this is a bit to the surprise of the Russians, who may have expected a soft landing of this war and a soft landing in an armistice of some more or less peaceful nature. It's not. It's going to be a landing, but it's not going to be a soft landing for them. Whether this is about long-term military strategy, I would put under it a certain doubt, as I think at this point of time, both sides assume that there will be a start of negotiations sometimes during the coming months. Yeah, people are talking about 2025 definitely, which is a time frame of 13 months. We should not forget. So that's quite a bit. But as to the expected or the witnessed Ukrainian actions, the shooting of ATACMS 2 days ago, of Scalp and Storm Shadow yesterday, I think we clearly see a sigh of relief on the side of the Ukrainian side that at last they can use these weapons insofar as they are available. And that's where the next big question mark comes in. How many Storm Shadows, how many ATACMS do they have? How many are the allied forces, the UK and the France and the USA are willing to release at this moment? And of course, how will the Russian answer will play out? I assume, which is pretty much my subjective personal assumption, that the Americans, and as I said, both presidents, Biden and Trump, are willing to push Russia in the corner because they understand that Mr. Putin will only act and react rationally or somehow if he's been pushed in the corner. So they are risking a possible nuclear retaliatory strike, and they risk it by assuming or by betting on China to step in and make clear that there will be no nuclear war in this Ukraine theater. And China has been very clear of this, and I would say all the non-Western, non-European countries, they now comprise more than 50% of the world economy, they comprise more than 85% of the world population, and they do not want a nuclear war at this point of time.
Speaking earlier on the US authorizing Kyiv to use American-supplied long-range missiles to strike within Russian territory, Ukrainian lawmaker and member of Parliamentary Committee for Defense and Security, Serhiy Rahmanin, had this to say.
How many missiles will we have? Will there be new missiles? What type of missiles are we talking about? There are a lot of open questions. What does this give the defense forces, the armed forces of Ukraine? It is definitely not a golden bullet. It is definitely not a miracle weapon, but it surely enhances the capabilities of our defense forces. The distance at which the Army Tactical Missile System can operate in the version of 300 kilometers offers a sufficiently large number of stationary targets. Biden still feels, if not complacency, then certain obligations to Ukraine. He was restrained during the pre-election campaign. What he believed to be extremely drastic moves were not supposed to hurt the Democrats' chances. It is difficult to say how Russia will react. In my opinion, they have no particular counter-arguments against this. Moreover, I remind you that they also consider the occupied Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye and Kherson regions to be their territory. The fact that the rest of the civilized world does not think so does not stop the Russians. That is, de facto. From their point of view, strikes on Russian territory have already taken place.
Europe recorded its hottest season on record in the summer of 2024. The European Environmental Agency says surface air temperatures reached 1.54 degrees Celsius, surpassing the record set in 2022. The extreme weather conditions caused by climate change made it more difficult for farmers in Central Europe to grow traditional plants and crops. Apple cultivation is at risk in Central Europe due to climate change, according to the European Environmental Agency. farmers have now started to grow crops suited to the current climate conditions.
We simply have to look for products that grow here even when it gets so hot, when it gets a bit drier, that those who grow here and that we have alternatives to conventional products that are no longer as easy to cultivate as they used to be.
We sow very late compared to other agricultural crops because chia needs a soil temperature of at least 15 degrees throughout, and we don't reach that until June. As a result, we have a very late sowing time. Warm conditions and the special varieties actually do quite well. They are specially bred varieties, I would say, for the short day conditions here in Central Europe.
The question of adapting farming methods is important for many farmers as extreme weather is leading to hotter and drier summers. Discussions on climate change continue at COP29 in Azerbaijan until Friday. Music and dance is more than the food of love for South Africans. It's a way of expression shared by all. For the elderly living in Marpen village, a jazz club is providing a source of entertainment and engagement. Founder of the Village Vanguard Jazz Movement, Paul Teke, says he set up the platform to inspire active lifestyle among the elderly through music, and the community in Mpumalanga province have welcomed the initiative.
What you see, the footwork, experience or whatever, is just a theme to attract people. But it's a way of doing things differently.
Yes, I also dance, depending on how moved I am by the music playing, because sometimes it's necessary that you must dance. Sometimes it's enjoyable to also just listen to the combination of instruments playing and soak in the music. We should not just sit at home as pensioners, because just sitting in one place at times, it ruins your mind. Your body is not active. So even when illness comes, it persists. But if you move, things are much better.
The club holds live music sessions every fortnight, and it's attended by many older residents from the local villages.